Start by thanking everybody for making the time in your I know are very busy diaries to come along to the first of our masterclasses. And what we're aiming to do with these is to get some of our established researchers and colleagues across the university to present their experiences and insights into some of the key themes that can support the development of our research culture across the university. So I'm Christina Victor, and one of my great interests is in public engagement in research. So the first seminar, or the first masterclass, is going to be focused on the broad topic area of public engagement. And the way we're going to run it today is that I will make a few preliminary remarks. Then our speakers, Louise Mansfield, Meriel, Norris, and Cherry Kilbride, will take up the baton and provide the development, I think, of some of the points that I'm going to make. We are planning to run the presentations continuously, and then if you have questions, we'll take them at the end. If you could put them in the chat, that will be very helpful, and we'll work through them. I am aware that after we'd set the date for this, a staff briefing is set for 1 o'clock. So if anybody feels that that's a more interesting session to go to, please don't feel you can't leave and go to that. So just the usual kind of housekeeping things. The session is being recorded, so if you have to leave or you lose connectivity or you want to pass it around to your colleagues, that'll be fine. If you could keep your mics muted, that will help. I think that's all I want to say by way of introduction, apart from thanking my speakers who I've cajoled, coerced, and in other ways encouraged to contribute today. So I really appreciate them making the time and you all making the time. I hope you find it of use. I'm sure that my colleagues will be very happy to follow up with people, any points that we don't have time to deal with here. So what I want to talk about in my sort of opening few minutes is really around public engagement and where it sits within the university. So we principally flag this as being around research, and so public engagement in research. But I think public engagement in research is only one element of what I think is this concept of the engaged university, so that a university should be thinking about public engagement in the research activity of what we do, but we should also think about that from a teaching point of view, that we should be thinking about the university as knowledge exchange, so that we are engaging in two-way conversations with the wider society, and also thinking about social responsibility, the kind of maximizing the benefits that the institution can generate. So for me, what is loosely described today around public engagement research is just one part of the values and vision of the university. So it's not something that sits in a box on its own. It's part of I think a whole ethos of a university, and it reflects in many ways how universities have changed in how we think about our position in society, but also our position in terms of research around perhaps being open and transparent and accountable about the type of research that we do, thinking about making our values around engagement and social benefit central to our research vision and mission. I think public engagement is if you like, a mindset about how we think about our research, and that making our public, inverted commas, feel that they really have a stake in what we do, and that we have nothing to hide, inverted commas. I think also as well, this idea of an engaged university links with increasingly, or at least ensuring that the work that we do has relevance and that it's responsive to the changing society. And I think in many ways how universities responded to the COVID pandemic is a very good example of that. So for me, although we're talking about research today and how we think about public engagement, I think it's only part of the whole vision and mission of the university, and one which I shall be sharing at the very first opportunity with the new Vice Chancellor, because I think it's really important, particularly for a university like Brunel, where if the vision of our research is that we do research that's of benefit to society, and we can't do that by just talking to ourselves. So I just want to introduce you to a few concepts that my colleagues will then develop. So this is the idea of the public engagement onion. This particular model is from the Wellcome Trust. So anybody who knows me realizes I wouldn't have been able to construct that myself, but I think it nicely identifies the different types of engagement that we can have in research and how we think about it. So different types of engagement vary for different projects at various points in time. And essentially, one part of the public engagement onion is about informing people about what we do, being open and transparent. And we at Brunel have particularly open lectures, talks, festivals. So actually, then there are arts and other ways of thinking about it. So actually informing and also inspiring. Well, I like to think of the number of young people who have been inspired to go into biomedical research by the profile that's been given to that focus of research through COVID, and also to study courses in these areas. And in our Division of Global Public Health, our course in public health has never been so popular. So part of our role is informing, inspiring, showing what we do. The second sort of element, and I'm sure my colleagues will draw these together, is around consulting people. And particularly by involving experts by experience in our work. As academics, we are not the sole owners of knowledge. And then there's ideas around collaboration, using a much more participative role for the public as researchers. So citizen science is a good example of this. So public engagement in research is a very broad, it's a very broad church. And I guess one of the messages today is it fits with almost everybody's research. It's just what type of engagement it is. And the second thing, and I know my colleagues will develop this, so I won't go into too much detail here, but it's who is the public. There are lots of different communities that we may want to involve in our research at different times at different places. So it's important to think about there is not the public, but there are a whole variety of publics. And I know my colleagues will develop that point further. And I just wanted to conclude my remarks before I hand over to Louise with a bit of shameless promotion of one of our long-standing groups that we have at Brunel, which I think exemplifies all of that model, the public engagement onion model, which is BORG, which is our Brunel Older People's Reference Group, that who were created in 2008, and who I think exemplify all of those different stages. They currently, they are attached to the Aging Studies Group within the new Centre for Health and Wellbeing Across the Life course. It's no good forgetting the name of my own centre, but anyway, I've got all the right words, whether they're in the right order is somewhat different. And I think BORG exemplify the different activities that is wrapped up in public engagement. We have run many and varied successful seminars where our BORG members come along. People have helped us interpret results, dissemination, but also as well contributing to proposals, helping us think about developing proposals, and very importantly, about thinking about what the government may well have its priority areas for aging research, but actually what the older adults think are the most important things. So I think this is a very good model of what we do. I put on the slide the link to the Borg webpage, and there's a video from Eleanor van der Heuvel, who was one of the two people who set this up in 2008. And there are a couple of pictures there from our 10th birthday party. And I put that there because somehow public engagement sounds worthy. And all I've said about mission and vision makes it sound a very worthy enterprise. It is also one of the most rewarding, interesting, and fun parts of a research activity. And I'll hand over to Louise there. Thank you.
Thanks, Christina. And I would add to the worthiness and to the fun and the excitement that it's probably one of the hardest parts of a research project to get right. Let me just share my screen with you. So I'm just going to pick up on some of the things that Christina has said and develop those a little bit. And in the spirit of public engagement, I'm seeing you as my publics today, and I'm going to ask you to engage a little bit with some of the things and get you just to reflect a little bit on how public engagement works for your project. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how this might be connected to impact, and then at the end I'll say why that might not be a good idea. So some contradictions, there might seem some contradiction, and really it's about getting underneath the surface of public engagement and really exploring it with a critical lens, how best to make it work for your project using some key principles that I think are really important to the process, and thinking about it strategically and planning it and ensuring that there's effective collaboration is really, really essential. So just to develop on from the complexity that Christina has highlighted, it's worth just thinking about what is public engagement and who our publics are. And I think the key thing here is that there are varied definitions. And so it's probably not helpful to labour on a particular definition, but just to highlight the variety and to instill in people a confidence that there are different ways of doing this. And apart from the universal kind of principles that I'm going to set out, tailoring it to your project, to the needs and wants of the people you are engaging with as publics is really, really critical. So sometimes there's some precise definitions. This is just one that is the practice of involving members of the public, the general public, in agenda setting, decision making, policy forming activities, etc., which is kind of what Christina's described the Borg as. That's one way of looking at it. But actually, the National Centre for Public Engagement has a broader, more flexible definition that I think is really helpful, particularly in the articulation of there being a myriad of ways in which public engagement activity can happen. And alongside that brings a myriad of benefits, as well as some challenges, which I think people should think about, and I'll highlight some of those as we go through. And it talks about engagement as this two-way process. I'd go further. I think that there's a multi-way process involving interaction, listening. I mean, I've written about this idea of reciprocity, what that means beyond the give and take of a research project, a genuine focus on listening to and hearing the publics that are involved in your project for mutual benefit. Very easy to take in public engagement projects, and we do a lot of taking in higher education, much harder to give, and I'll talk about that kind of mutual exchange as we go through this. So I think the key kind of starting point, the framework for thinking about public engagement, those people who've got some experience and expertise who are here will see these and they will resonate with the work you're doing. People who are new to it, I think these are some kind of framing, sensitizing points really. The public are not a homogenous or undifferentiated group. Even if when you're working with the general public, they are heterogeneous, diverse and complex. And that is what is such a kind of, that's why they are so vibrant in your research project. And the diagram that Christina showed us is I think a really good starting point. It comes from an approach around audience segmentation, and it's promoted by the National Coordinating Centre for Public Engagement. And I think that's a really useful starting point. and we use it for all of the projects. I think that there is a synergy between public engagement groups that are sustainable, long-lasting, like the Borg that's been around for 10 years, that can fit and meet research requirements as they go along around a core enduring theme like aging studies. For many projects, the public engagement work is really bespoke to the project, and it needs to be. And there's always a kind of, I'm always just a little bit disconcerted sometimes when that happens, because you invest a lot of time and so do other people in the project, and the project comes to the end and there's no sustainability in it. Sometimes that is by necessity, but I think planning for the exit strategy is key. Not the fact that it stops, it's how you plan for that to stop. So I think mapping and segmenting your publics as a starting point for any project is really, really valuable. In this model, we've got 4 categories, if you like, or segments: the general public, the public sector, business, and then the civil society groups. There may be more in your projects, each of those actually relating to smaller groups. So what I think would be really useful for everyone here, just to reflect on for 2 minutes, is to take the principle of developing a public engagement plan right from the outset and thinking about what difference that makes to whom and in what way. So what I want you to do, just first of all, just for a couple of minutes, and you can put your comments in the chat, or after 2 minutes, we can come back and discuss some of these if you want to. I'll come back to impact. Is just for you to map out who your publics are. Think of a project that you want to do, a project you're doing, and just on a piece of paper or in your head, start to think about how you might segment in this kind of a way the publics in your project. I mean, I always end up writing this on the back of an envelope or a piece of paper. We sometimes, when we're in big groups, do it through post-it notes. It doesn't matter how you do it. Just reflect for 2 minutes on a project, so it needs to be a defined project, who the publics are that you might want to engage in that project. And I let you reflect. I'm totally conscious I've thrown this at you. Typically in a public engagement project, you'd have some preparatory work, you'd be doing all your ethics, etc., etc. But as an exercise in thinking about it, I think it's really valuable. Does anybody want to share, feel confident enough to share? Do they want to put anything in the chat about a project and a list of their particular publics that they would want to engage in that I can read out? Anybody feeling brave enough to share where they're at?
I'm brave.
Go on then, be brave.
So Christina knows a little bit about this. We're working on an interdisciplinary project,
okay,
teaching AI to read racism online in a more effective, nuanced way.
Oh.
And our first public is everybody online, because we're wanting to look at actual language usage, not rather than victims of racism.
Yeah.
Then we've also got the victims of racism, as they are, I guess, the key beneficiaries of removing that kind of language. We've also talked about putting together workshop groups to better hone our understanding of racist attitudes and how they're embedded in language, and that would include groups who are victims of it, but also groups that are just online in general. This is of direct interest to big tech firms, because in theory it would allow them to police the social media platforms more effectively. We believe that it's of interest to policymakers, because we're well aware that both racism and the threats of big tech are both concerns of the Cabinet Office and a couple of other places. We would probably need to engage with people online who could get the message out. I suspect those would be influencers and celebrities, people with platforms with many, many followers, otherwise the message may get lost. I'm aware of the fact that this would be of interest also to NGOs and other organizations, charity organizations, who may have specific component parts of racism that they're dealing with. And then eventually we have a feeling that although this is about racist language, the methodology is applicable to other groups who may feel oppressed by aggressive language usage online. So that's quite a lot. That's quite a wide.
Fantastic. That is a brilliant example, and I'll pull out some of the key things here. So that is a brilliant example of the range of publics in one single project. What that immediately brings to mind is, oh my God, how do I actually do this engagement? I think there's a step before the question of how, actually several steps before the question of how. And that's what I want you to do in this next activity, because the steps before the question of how have to do with why would these people want to engage with you, and why do you want to engage with them? When are they going to engage? And what are the benefits? Let me just share my slides again, because this comes to why I think there is some value in thinking about, I know it's a political issue at the moment, if there's some value in thinking about the idea of impact. So this is the word on impact, because it comes from RC UK, and it's the thing that drives the ref, okay? And we can get these lovely definitions about demonstrable contribution that excellent research makes and advances our discipline from an academic impact point of view. In terms of the societal and economic impacts, we're talking about the demonstrable contribution that our research makes to society and economy. My view when you start a project is to just deconstruct this a little bit and think about impact as, how do I make a difference? What difference do I want to make? And how do I make it? So, and with that in mind, I mean, this is just exactly what William said. When we were mapping out one of our projects, which is a big ESRC funded project on looking at what works in culture and sport for well-being, we had a similar kind of, I mean, this looks beautifully seamless, but, I don't think we finalized this until we were somewhere through the project, to be honest. But you can see it's a segmentation approach to who was in the project that we needed to work with. And as you can imagine, working with these different groups was very, very diverse and different. But actually what shaped this was, why do we want to engage with these? What difference do we want to make, and when do we want to make that difference? So, second task, just a reflection. And again, you don't have to have a nice neat table. You can just do a few scribbles. But I want you just to pick an objective in the project that you're doing and think about who will benefit in relation to that objective, how they will benefit, and when. Is it going to be in the development of the research question? Is it going to be after some data collection? These are really thorny issues. Again, just 2 minutes reflecting on these things. Other questions will come to mind. But it is part of this approach to a really strategic endeavour, I think, that capitalises and optimises, I guess is the word, optimises our approach to public engagement. And it's important whether you've got one group or whether you've got 15 groups to think about, what am I trying to do in my research? Who's going to benefit from it? Who are they? How will they benefit? Really difficult question about the process of impact, and when. So just 2 minutes on that. And just a few more moments. Again, I'm conscious that I'm asking you to strategize in 2 minutes. And what I'd be helpful is if there's anyone out there for whom this is really quite new, who's got to the bit where they say, yeah, I've got an objective, I know who's going to benefit, haven't been in touch with them, but I have no idea exactly what the benefits will really be and how I'm going to engender them. And I've got a bit of a sense of the timing, but it's not well formed. Is there anyone in the group for whom this is quite new and these questions are quite difficult? Josephine, I'm gonna come to you. Let's have an airing of the challenges, because let me tell you, even when you've done this for ages, I can guarantee that they are still a challenging part of the project. Give us an overview.
So I haven't done funded research before. It's all been self-funded, and I've only recently finished my PhD.
Congratulations.
But the last and first funding application I put in involved what I thought would be a great public engagement exercise, in that I would be researching local community radio stations across the country and how they organize their publicity and their marketing, and how they get small business enterprises on board to think of them as a viable option for these companies to invest in, to sponsor and advertise. And in my head, I'm thinking, and this is great for the regulator, because you know, then Ofcom will see that it's a viable sector. But actually to sit down and look at this chart and think, right, if I really want the regulator to feel that they're going to benefit, what is the realistic outcome that I can offer, and how can I hook them in? Because if they see that the benefit of having a better equipped and informed and more sustainable community radio sector is good for them because it guarantees they can provide local broadcasting, then that's the result. So it has made me, because I've had to consider the regulator as one of my publics in an objectives
yes perfect. I mean, I wish we had more time to discuss this. Maybe we should have another separate kind of session for people who've got projects going and they want to kind of air some of these things. But yeah, I think you highlight brilliantly that just in this very simple table, you are sensitized to a whole load of questions that you maybe can't answer yet, that you have to create a strategy and a plan for, and that takes some time. And so honestly, this needs to be an embedded process within research projects, and as much as you can answer some of the questions, they may not be able to answer it fully. And I'll talk about why I think structured reflexivity in a project, where you update, change, edit your plans along the kind of public engagement and impact route, as well as your other research plans, is really, really essential. Thank you, Josephine, for sharing. I'm not going to spend time on the next task, but actually what we will see now is that this is one really good planning strategy with this set of questions. You know, when we do it, we often have all sorts of, I love a post-it note and a mind map, and they can be really valuable. Some people like to use software to do it. You can do it in any way. It's actually just about engaging in that process. But actually what's also important is to unpick the benefits a little bit more. So to ask yourself, okay, I've talked about the benefits. What's the actual real impact here? Who's it going to happen for, when and where? How will I know impact has actually happened? We forget this. We talk a lot about, I'm having great impact and I'm working with this group and, you know, it's really good. And then when it comes to it, we've got no, and it doesn't need to be fixed and formal and structured, but there needs to be a way of knowing that you've made your difference. It might be a workshop or a meeting that reflects on that. It might be an interview, part of an interview that reflects on that. But somehow we really need to think about, how do we know the difference we want to make with our public engagement has happened? And that's really, really key. And so that I'm going to leave you with that. I don't mind sharing these slides. That's another question. And then for absolutely fundamental, which is what Josephine was raising, and William also, just in the complexity of his project, where is my public engagement plan at risk? And that's often connected to the difference you want to make. And, you know, this is a real art in relationship building. Relationships and partnerships are not set in stone. They're difficult, they change, they have to be negotiated. And it's worth thinking about the risks of your public engagement project. And just for the last 2 minutes, I want to highlight some of those challenges, as well as the potentials. And then, because I think that's going to lead into Meriel's overview of how she's experienced a public engagement project. So I think we can agree that the potential for academics is that it really is a vital component of the research process. It enriches what we're asking, provides methodological rigor, and it can create benefits for all, really high impact benefits, if we know what they are and we have a mechanism for assessing them and the risks of them being realised. But I love this slide. It's from Peter Beresford's work around working with public and patient groups, actually, because there is a challenge in public engagement work around what the National Coordinating Centre calls a two-way process and what I would call a multi-way process. And it reflects Christina's point about, you know, this balance between informing and consulting, and then really co-producing, just to throw another kind of word out there. It's very easy to take your ideas and ask people what they think of them without really engaging in what I would argue needs to be a genuine and authentic approach to consistently listening to people and working on their needs and desires as well as your own. So, and that's what reciprocity is. And I think that's something to bear in mind. And just from our own experiences there, I find three kind of categories of challenges. the time and timing of public engagement, it takes an inordinate amount of labour and skill to start it, to keep it going. And everyone in the project works to different times. If you're working with policymakers, they want things in 24 hours, you know, even before your research has started. If you're working with public and citizen groups, the general public, the timing and pace of their engagement will be really difficult, and you need time to be able to keep going back to people. There are challenges around expectations and resources. It's my most tiring job, is doing kind of any co-production work, and you need to build that into your project. And academic conventions often don't fit with other conventions of other groups that you're working with in a public engagement project. And of course, capacity and capacity building, I think, is really underplayed. It's often not costed in. You know, this is skilled work, and we need to think about how those skills are going to be developed in us and with our public engagement groups. My final point, having said that I think impact is so important, is just to bring a critical eye to the idea of impact, because there's lots of work that demonstrates it's problematic. It's problematic when it's one-way dissemination. If there's no real co-produced element to it, it's problematic. And actually, we need to be careful that in this quest to, you know, create impact and show our impact and assess our impact, we might actually hijack the research process. So something to be aware of. And only capturing relatively short-term impacts, I think, does a disservice to the project, and it does a disservice to the wider long-term impact of the project. So that's really important. And just as a summary, again, because this is so complex, and I think that there are some principles and processes, Tess Kay and I developed a kind of key questions for partnership and public engagement work for impact, and then some key processes. And I'm just going to leave you with them because it reflects what we've said. Ask who your public is, what sort of engagement you want, and how that's going to happen and when. And engage in these processes of, you know, thinking about your resources and how you manage and work through those, not just the pounds and pennies, but the human resource aspect. Take a stance of reciprocity and crucially reflect on the process all the way through your project. And I've probably gone over time, but I'm going to leave it there and hand over to Meriel.
Thanks, Louise. And I'm very happy for you to carry on, actually, because it's one of those things. I don't think I've ever seen it structured actually so clearly, and it makes me wish I'd done that in the beginning of all of our projects. Sadly, we didn't. So what you're going to get now is a much more kind of a generalized reflection on a whole bunch of projects that I've been involved with a number of different colleagues, of which Cherry is a key one, and she's in the audience, but others as well, where different levels of public engagement have been integrated in one way or another. And we're just going to use all of those examples to give some of the sense of how, the what, the when, the issues, the how you manage them, etc. So I'll share my screen. I'm afraid I can't do slideshow because my computer goes a bit funny, but hopefully you will be able to see it anyway. So hopefully that's up. Now, I'm a physiotherapist by background, and so what you're going to get is very much a view from a variety of different research projects to do with physical rehabilitation, and I do totally acknowledge all of my colleagues with this. And just to give you just an idea of this, there's a number of studies, there's others I'll pull on, but these are all externally funded ones that involve different groups of people with disabilities, different issues. Some of them are intervention studies, some of them are looking at processes within health, others are looking at the kind of for the rhombus creation of a new tool that will then transfer to a different environment, you know, so it's pulling on lots of different things with lots of different groups. And I'm going to, hopefully, if I do it well, pull out examples on how it's worked in reality. So I want to start with the who and the how and the what. And in relation to the who, you've just done that with Louise, but very much in most of these projects, not in all of them, the who has varied. But for sure, we have always included, and at different stages and in different processes, which I'll come to in a minute, people who have lived experience of the issue that we're exploring. Now, sometimes that's lived experience of the condition, but for example, in the CP transition study, it's the people who have the experience of going through transition. So that would be young people with cerebral palsy, and there we would look at the age of what the definition is young people. But those experiences are very rarely just one person, so we'd look broader. So that may be carers or family members or other relevant people within that. But because a lot of our research is related to kind of professional input or that interaction between people with disabilities and professionals, then it would be whatever that range of professionals are and wherever they work. So that's often the health service, but that could be charity, that could be in private practice, that could be social, that could be education. So just having professionals working in the field makes it sound very simple. In some of the projects it was, but in other projects it was much broader about who these professionals were. Also service managers and commissioners, because of course you can have all the professionals, but they're not the ones who are necessarily organising the services if the projects look at that, and the commissioners that pay for it. We haven't until this point directly involved policymakers, nor the media, which I think is really important in a lot of things, in how kind of stories about care and other things like that are disseminated. But actually at the end, I'll just pick on some kind of things that kind of emerged from the process that we weren't expecting. In terms of how we very much sit around the consulting and collaborating, that's where we sit. Now, none of these are kind of formal co-production. They weren't action research, but we did consult and collaborate at different levels. So in some of the projects, we had examples a little bit like the Borg, where there was an open forum already, or research involvement groups, and certainly with the Retrain project, which was a collaboration with Exeter, there was a meeting where they talked about what issues were relevant for people who were living long-term with stroke, and they discussed that with people who were living with stroke and their carers, and they came up with a number of ideas. And actually it was one of those ideas that went forward to create the Retrain project. So it was a directly driven question from people's experience and the issues that they were finding, and also the questions they had about an intervention that seems to be popular, and they wanted to know if it was any good. So a lot of those kind of more open forums, as Christina's always indicated, really kind of assist with kind of reflecting on what questions are important to different stakeholders. So it's not just what's coming out of the research hat of where the gap is, but actually where a meaningful gap is, and a kind of relevant gap for now and here, and kind of creation of those initial ideas. In some of the projects, we've also had a number of people from a variety of those different groups within the research team itself. So with Retrain, we had stroke survivors, we had professionals within the group, similar with iStepped, which looked at physical activity, and MS, we had different range of professionals and also people with MS within that. And they're involved in the whole process, as you would imagine. We've got advisory groups, and I've split them as advisory because sometimes advisory individuals are also how we use. If you've got people with particular expertise that you want to draw in, or sometimes it's advisory groups, and they come in at different points where we're checking ideas, reviewing documents, potentially helping with the intervention development. And I'll give some examples of that: recruitment pathways, multiple different areas in which they've supported our work. And then we've called them reference groups. I know these terms are kind of interchangeable, but kind of groups which weren't involved in the research process themselves. So they weren't looking at the documents, they weren't helping with recruitment, but at the latter point are kind of a checkpoint for us to go, okay, we've found this. What do you think about this? Does this resonate? Where would you prioritize this? And certainly with the Ignition study, where we're looking at this transition process for young people with cerebral palsy, we've got 2 reference groups, both young people with cerebral palsy and their parents, and they are really helping us prioritize. The findings are so broad, and we are moving in the second part of the project to come up with some tools to address some of the issues, but we can't do all of them. So rather than us sitting in a room and deciding the ones that we think are the most important, we're taking that to the advisory group and the reference groups to go, which ones are the most important for you? Which are the ones that you think we should be taking forward in what order? So we're trying to do some work to just kind of, again, keep it based in reality. There are multiple other ways. These are just the main ways that we have used in our project so far. And this is probably a bit busy for everybody to read, but they're just some kind of concrete examples, and I won't talk through them all. But for example, one of them was an intervention study, and we actually used and worked with, well, they were ideas from people who lived with that condition about how they think that that intervention would be most meaningful to the people. So it was a training video. Well, it was a training thing we wanted to do. And they said, do it in a video form. Don't use avatars. Don't use people who don't look like us. Make sure it's this long. Make sure it's in this format. And then they worked with us, not only in the content, but how it be presented and, you know, its length and all of those things. They also, in a different project, in the iStep-MS project, they helped us with some of the training tools. And this was really, really critical because a lot of the work was about training professionals in the delivery. And we could do the training. We had cognitive behavioral therapists working with us, but actually creating tools that made the training kind of live made it much easier and much more accessible for the professionals we're training. So people worked with that. We had the professionals and the people with MS working on the training tool. And actually what we found later, which I will talk about in terms of impact, made a really critical difference to the fidelity of the project. And so actually the core kind of quality of the intervention project itself was enhanced by that working together in that process. There are others which I won't focus on just because of time. So in terms of value added, I haven't kind of cloaked this in terms of impact, but I just, again, want to reflect on where I think our projects have made some changes. As I said at the beginning, a key one is that we as researchers hopefully are asking questions that matter to the people we are working with and working for, and not just because it's interesting to us. There are the known things, of course, the very practical things that actually, when we have assistance and we work collaboratively on how documents and recruitment can be inclusive, then they can become better. And that's really critical in our field, because many of the people who we want to talk to and want to work with and want to engage in the research at all different levels have cognitive problems, have speech and language problems. And it's really important that we make sure that actually we are inclusive as possible. And we need to make sure that we do that in a way that is appropriate and sensitive, and not just rely on our ability to write a very simple participant information sheet, because we won't, because that's not what we look at. And so actually involving the appropriate publics to assist with that has become really important. Similar with recruitment, you know, we have ideas of how we can recruit. We have our very simple recruitment pathways to capture, you know, some people, but they are usually people who are easy to capture, and they're often not the people we want to include within our research. You know, it is, you know, depending on the nature of research. For example, when we're doing our research on physical activity, it's quite easy for us to recruit people who are already motivated by physical activity within those groups, people who are already engaged with the NGOs that we work with. Less easy to recruit and work with people who have already disengaged from those processes, but yet they are often the people who we, in order to kind of do our research, need to engage with most. As I've mentioned, I think our inclusion and our collaborative work has led to better intervention. The interventions themselves are more targeted, more nuanced, and designed in a way that are more accessible and more approachable, and hopefully better delivery, and with that sense also the fidelity that I mentioned about. In a number of things, the use of the reference group, they have challenged our understanding of what the results may mean, and also the importance of them. Things that perhaps they were kind of minority themes or didn't come up as major in the surveys, for example, they were going, that's really interesting because for them that's really important. And then that becomes a discussion point to challenge again, who was it that we captured, whose voice are we going to prioritize, and what that means. That is not simple though, because actually you have your results and then you have other people reflecting on those results. And which one you prioritize can become quite a discussion and quite a dilemma. the outputs, we're working really hard to not just write academic papers, not just to do podcasts, and not just to kind of go to conferences and presentations, but actually, again, working with our reference and advisory groups to go, how would you like to hear this information? How would you like to access it? And what would be an approachable way to do that and a meaningful way to do that? That sometimes has involved websites, that's involved us talking directly. That's also been sometimes asked to be advocates and working with organizations that are advocates to promote this. And actually, one of the kind of creations of some of our work with this has been to create a whole new kind of network of researchers, which includes NGOs and advocates in the field, to actually do the next steps. So thinking about how we can then target the government through using this new network that we've created through those discussions. And for sure, in almost all of the studies, working with those different groups have helped us think about what comes next. And in fact, sometimes in the projects, our next project is already clear from the kind of comments and feedback that they have about what we're doing. Why are you only asking this question? With one of them, with the Parkinson's disease, one where we're looking at freezing, we've had to look at it in a particular context, and they're saying, well, why aren't you looking at it when we're off the meds? Because that's more important, that's the more dangerous time you should be looking at that. And that led on to our next project, etc. So there's always opportunities, if you're listening carefully, to think about what are they telling us to move forward. But it's not always plain sailing. There's lots of interesting things to contend with, and Louise has commented on these, so I will just kind of hopefully not repeat what she said, but jump up from them. And one of the things with time, I'll start with, is that it isn't just the amount of time it takes to collaborate and discuss and listen, but also the time for networking, the time to actually, and the efforts to find out who the publics are and who the kind of appropriate people within that publics are, which I'll talk about in a minute, the time to manage that, the time, the flexibility in time, which Louise talked about, but also the flexibility within your project time to deliver these. Most of these things can't be predicted in advance, yet you have to predict them in advance, in terms of you have to predict that there is going to be some slippages, and therefore you have to try and kind of account for that. And that also goes with funding. Funding is complicated. If we're talking about the initial starting point, those discussions, where does that money even come from? That's not in a project budget, because we're talking about that before a project's even started. Some of that initial work, if they, you know, if people are going to be involved before you get the money, how are you going to fund that appropriately? Or are we just going to expect them to give their time free, when in fact we're paid a salary to do this job? So there's lots of questions there. There's also, again, about the type of funding. And while we have recommendations by organisations like involved with that, actually individuals have their own kind of approach to funding. So in one example, we had a budget for kind of their time. But one of the participants, one of the collaborators in our advisory group, she didn't want her time paid. She was very happy for that. But she really, to manage her fatigue, she really needed to get a taxi from home to our meeting centres and back again. But that wasn't on our budget line. It was as a cost for personnel, but not for travel. And so we had to have the flexibility to move that around, that actually you don't know in advance quite where that funding is going to go. Lots of things to think about with that. That planning in advance that Louise was talking about, really critical as well to how you're going to think about different forms of recruitment and dissemination there. In terms of the right people, Louise has talked about that, but that is hard work. Not to just get the people who are going to agree with you, but also to have the people who won't, who will challenge you in multiple different perspectives, and then have the capacity within your project to manage those potential areas of differences and actually navigate a pathway through them, and to make sure that everybody in the team is on board with where the power is in that team. That, you know, that actually, if there are members of the research group who think they have the ultimate decision making, and yet you're trying to do something collaboratively, then you're going to have a clash. And so actually making sure that the whole team understands the principles that you are working forward and towards. And then finally, being prepared to change for sure. If you are creating a situation where you want to consult and collaborate, you have to be prepared that your project will change. We've got multiple examples of that, where what we looked at changed, our outcome measures changed, how we decided to proceed with the interventions changed, all of our documents changed, our timelines changed, several things changed, and you have to be prepared and open for that. Otherwise, it's just ticking a box. And then very finally, just a little diagram. Of course, this is about multiple perspectives and having multiple perspectives, but also just remembering sometimes there are situations where if you talk to the right people and you get involvement of the right people, they might just give you a perspective that brings it all together and perhaps challenge our slightly strange way of looking at it, because we are strange as researchers, needs a little bit of a shift. And I think that's all I have to say for now. Over to you, Cherry.
Thank you very much, Meriel, and my colleagues coming before. Oh, Amir, you're not leaving me at 1 o'clock. Okay, I'm not going to be as long as my colleagues, partly because I am in a, and I can't dual task either. But I seem to be in a noisy environment where there's even somebody decided to do some sort of strimming outside. So I do hope that you can hear me okay. So I'm coming from this slightly different but completely complementary area of both Louise and Meriel has talked about beforehand. So I'm talking to you today as with my hat on as a director of research within the Brunel Partners Academic Centre for Health Sciences, BPACHS, and trying to consider who are our publics and how can we therefore work together within that. I'm also a physiotherapist, but I do spend my time, therefore, across the NHS environment and also at the university as well. So is it going to move on? It doesn't want to move on now. So just hold on while we see whether, oh, it's a bit slow like me. Anyway, so moved on to who are BPACHS publics. So our partners, because that's what we like to call them rather than our publics, but that's a useful term for the way that we're thinking about things today, are obviously, us here at Brunel University, because I'm saying us because that's where I'm encamped at the moment here. But also, like I say, our local partners across Hillingdon Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust, Central and North West London NHS Foundation Trust, which is a huge foundation trust across a great expanse, and then the Royal Brompton and Harefields Hospitals. And then also with associates such as the Hillingdon Health and Care Partners and Hillingdon GPs Confederacy. So already we've heard about, the heterogeneity of public and publics. And you can imagine that, we know the size of Brunel is massive. We're like a little city or a little town. The same as, each, NHS trust that we'll be working with. It's not only just health that we've got inside there, but we've got, engineering, we've got business, we've got computing, all of those different types of publics within those arenas. And it's really thinking about how we can best come together and share and co-produce and develop research with multiple impacts and multiple benefits as well. So in terms of talking about benefits, I just wanted to highlight those that are saying for an academic health science centre. And they are, partnerships between universities, NHS organisations that combine excellence in research, education, patient care. Then that leads to this accelerating of innovation in these areas, which then benefits patients, communities, staff, students, and, as in all of us. So, these loops are just sort of connected because then it comes back to the university and that feeds back out to the health environments and the social environments as well. So it's just in terms of the multiple benefits of engaging with these different publics. And I've tried to show that here in this translational pipeline, and that, you know, Brunel is, you know, we've got our life sciences, you know, Christina brought it up at the beginning, and it's great that far more people are engaged and wanting to be engaged in those types of professions. You know, some good coming out of the difficult times that we've had. So, you know, Brunel has got lots of fantastic research going on across the campus and beyond. And really, in terms of BPACHS as an academic health science centre, we want to be able to help to connect the publics and network these different publics that we have, you know, our doorstep almost really with us. And so I'm working across the different, I say, the different trusts and the health and social care settings. And it works both ways. You can see with the arrow at the bottom, because it's by working with and being embedded in trusts as well, and like say health and care social situations, that we find what is really important to those people, what matters to those patients, what matters to those staff, and how that feeds into ideas that we can then try to build on from you know, a university point of view as well. So exactly as my other colleagues have been saying about reciprocity, and I said that word, hooray. So good. Sorry, so we had one up there. Yeah, there's my extra little squares. Oh, I didn't know I had so many, but there you go. So thinking then about impact in terms of that, I love the hashtag that research is everyone's business, and we're trying to get that across all the NHS publics there, because it can often be seen as not core business, you know, and but it does bring benefits, and it's not a luxury. And by us joining together and trying to bring our publics together, you know, we can foster this culture of inquiry to develop staff, drive innovation, be economic, you know, that efficiency, and ultimately improving patient care. And that we know that research active hospitals, so for those who, you know, interact with the academic environments, that, you know, there are better patient outcomes. And that's the case for patients who are not even involved directly in those trials, because they benefit from our, you know, our different publics, our different worlds coming together and being research active. And in terms of, you know, sort of the, you know, the bottom line is how much more impact can we have in terms of if we then say that, you know, actually by us being able to bring and share our publics and our views together, that actually we do lead to these environments become safer, and there's less deaths occurring in them. Quality of life is better, because we know it's not just about, you know, how you live, well, it's about how you live your life, not that you're just living there. And in terms of, we've seen the different ways that we can deconstruct aspects of impact and the work that we're doing. And so this one is just highlighting different aspects with the benefits of, you know, academic clinical research partnerships. So we know from going, you know, the health promotion and prevention aspect, to knowledge to improve patients' outcomes, we've talked about that, advancing practice and improving care, safety, quality, effectiveness. It helps to improve staff recruitment and retention, and that's hugely important to have stability within, you know, within our NHS and social care environments. We know that in terms of people need something going back into their systems after all of the challenges that they've been doing. And as you know, Louise and both Meriel have you know, described that lots of these things though do need a degree of, you know, research capacity and capability building, etc. And that's where, you know, having partnerships and bringing the publics together in terms of academic and health and social care is hugely beneficial, and we've been really feeling the benefits of that since I've started in this post in March earlier this year. And this is one picture of showing of where we collaborating. You know, I'm a neurophysiotherapist, and so my heart is in neuroscience. and neurorehabilitation. And this is my colleague Marco. Marco is very much based in a laboratory and sort of thinking with that pipeline of where things are. But his publics here are colleagues that we had, that came and joined us from some of our local NHS trusts, and trying to help think about how, real life applications of something that might be being developed in a laboratory, how that might really be useful, or really, do we need to scrap things and start again, etc. But, so it means that these collaborations and sharing ideas with different publics can lead to these spin-offs. And we work with SMEs as well, to bring, let's say, the engineering aspects. So we really do want to be able to draw upon all of those things more. And when we look at the wide range of institutes and the things that we do at Brunel, there are just endless potentials of engaging with health and social care publics for Brunel as a whole, and vice versa. So BPACHS can help bridge this, academic and clinical worlds. And so, for those of you out there, if you would like to sort of try to engage with a different type of public that you are currently doing so, really, please do get in touch, because that's, what we entirely want to do is to, like I say, do this collaboration, our onion of PPI. We want to really get down into those layers there, please. So, my email address is there at the bottom, and I welcome hearing from any of you. So thanks very much. Thank you.
Well done. Thanks everybody. I hope you found that as interesting and stimulating as I did. I guess we now, Anna, what time is it on a clock that bears any resemblance to GMT or BST? I think we have some time.
Yes, it's 1:10 on my computer.
Yeah, it's 1:20 on mine. How can it have the wrong time?
I don't know.
So I guess now we can open it up if anybody wants to make a comment or ask a question of our speakers. We have a few minutes, or if anybody doesn't have any burning questions, we can go and have some coffee.
I've got a burning question.
Okay.
So
anybody in particular, or
just about the choice of areas. So our difficulty is that we don't work in any of those areas where some of these questions are frankly more straightforward. So I think what we in arts and humanities, it's very difficult to imagine how we'd map some of those experiences. I'm sure they can be mapped, Christina, obviously, but we struggle to understand in terms of imagining how that would be the case. Whereas when I look at the thing, oh yeah, well that makes sense. And I know my project was directed towards a particular user group, but it's an unusual project that's the result of some kind of avant-garde breaking out of the box thinking on my part, because I realize otherwise this is very difficult. So I feel that in arts and humanities, and maybe in other areas as well in social sciences, it's a lot less clear as to the modality of the public engagement. For example, some research methodologies just use engaging the public, but ours don't necessarily. And just because a colleague works in theatre doesn't mean to say that colleague works in theatre. They just study theatre. So wondered whether there was any thoughts about whether or not there could be, I don't know, another spin-off event where we try and sort of look at how we break out of that. Because it's not so clear for us.
Yeah, I mean, can I make a comment?
Yeah, I saw you were quick out the box there, Louise.
Yeah, because we face this all the time working in community settings, William, which they're no less difficult and challenging, but they're different. They are so in a different way to to some of the things that Cherry and Meriel have described. And what we're moving towards, and this might be a really nice seminar, actually, a practical workshop, is more creative approaches to recognizing impact with the people for who impact is happening. So there's a more of a kind of co-produced approach, an engagement approach to recording impact. And there's some really nice models actually that come from some of the international development models have used these. There's a most significant change model, which we've used that has been really useful. And we're going to be trialing, hopefully in Ealing a ripple effect mapping exercise. And I think the mapping I mean the visual mapping exercises as a creative endeavor in and of itself, but also as a way of allowing people to see their impact in different ways can be useful. And I'm the least creative person in the world, and I think you might actually bring some further creativity to that. But I think we have to be innovative in this respect, William. I really do. And I think you can probably bring some innovation.
Yeah, just a follow-up on that. So, you know, one of our problems is that several people use the word deconstruction. That's my term and my colleagues' term from when we invented and developed that term from the work of Jacques Derrida 30 years ago. Kylie Minogue's record company was called Deconstruction, and MasterChef talk about deconstructing, you know, Yorkshire puddings every other week. That's our impact. We changed the world. But capturing that, as you're probably aware of, is very difficult. But more locally then, we need methods where our colleagues, as you said, can visualize and appreciate short-term. We can't wait for one week to change the world down the line.
And so, I get excited about this. This idea of structured reflexivity is really key, where you are thinking about that all the time. It's embedded into your project work, your workshops. It has a key component. Have a look at the ripple effect models. I think that they're really, really valuable. They can be just drawn out in a scruffy piece of paper. There's software that you can use to create a beautiful, you know, diagram. But it's getting at the complex timing of impact, that a tiny little action that doesn't really have any evidence around it can start to create this ripple effect that changes the world. And if you can kind of show that happening, then you get a picture of the big wave.
Okay, thanks. I can't see everybody, but I can see that Cherry has her hand up. Is that a legacy hand or is it?
No, it's not. No, it's not a legacy hand. It's a
brilliant
real hand.
Cherry, you're on it today. Excellent.
Thank you. If I can work out how to put it back down now. Yeah, I just wanted to, William, that was a really interesting, and thanks, Louise, for your comments back to that, because I am mindful that, and thank you for helping bring it to my mind, that many of the things that I did then speak about within that are very, perhaps they did come across as quite hard, measurable outcomes, but many of the things that are actually hidden in the complexity of working in these microorganisms of healthcare, you know, social care settings, are those softer outcomes that are really difficult to measure. And if I think back to, you know, and we do use things like action research within those environments, because we can't wait for something to be shown in a research project before we can put it back into practice. You know, we have to be able to innovate and go. And one of those ripple effect things, which, how would you measure this? That we went away as a stroke group, and the very intransient stroke physician, who was really never a team player, really quite difficult. There was a problem with his hotel room where we were staying, and myself and the OT said, we'll bunk in together because there's twin beds. And he then felt wanted because we actually thought about how can we get him into our hotel room, and that changed so much. You know, the outcomes of sort of going through that, you know, that tiny little action really that then led to so much. So it's just like, but
how did you, very, very hard-nosed, how did you capture that so that it was legitimate, exempt? So what we do is with lots of ripple effects, what we really would like is just something hard, capturable, so we could be funded. So we love them. So did you capture that? How did you
the only way that we were able to capture that was through then sort of the processes and the qualitative, because it was a mixed methods approach, and people spoke about this turning point in terms of how the team was then able to, you know, really come together. And then we had harder outcomes in the actual, you know, in terms of, like, say, the deaths, etc., and things like that, because stroke care essentially is about, you know, the way that teams work together.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you.
I don't know, Meriel, I can't see everybody on my screen, so I don't know, Meriel, if you want to say anything. It's not a requirement.
No, I mean, I'm sorry.
I know the one
buttons there. No, I mean, I think both of those examples. And I was just opening the link that Louise Louise has put up as well, which is really helpful. But I think the other thing just about time as well that's very difficult is that, and the impact of time, of course, is that when you are using the wrong word, when you're working with people who have a different concept of time, and that is really, that is really complex, that you almost need these markers, whatever these markers are, whether it's through action research or anything else, because what the funder wants to see is one thing, what the university wants to see with the ref is something else, different timeline. What people who are involved in research want to see is something that's meaningful to them, right? Kind of in the short term, and actually thinking through that and having those moments where you can look back and go, look at that change, and however you capture that, and Cherry's given some examples, but that importance of the moment of going, that's not where we were a couple of weeks ago, or that's not where we were, or look at that change, look how that input has changed what we're doing. And Louise has talked about those reflexive moments. I think it's really important to build those in so you don't forget them, and you don't forget that your timeline is the only timeline, because it isn't. There are multiple, and you need to keep reflecting back on these different requirements of how people conceive of time within these projects. I'm not sure that really talks to it, but from maybe.
Thanks for that, and we can certainly, if there's enthusiasm or interest, we can certainly set up another workshop looking at some of these issues and ways of capturing them in more detail later on in the, I was going to say term, but academic year, not a problem.
I don't know.
Genevieve, you've got your hand up.
Yes, this session has been really, really useful. At the beginning, I wasn't really sure, but Cherry, with my cross experience about CCG and THHT and Brunel and so on, we certainly need to have a conversation. So really what's come to me is that there are people around, and in this case it's me, who have really, really valuable contribution to make to some of the issues that you're facing. And it's a matter of how do we ever get together to be able to do that. Yes, because I was on the PP, we've even forgotten the name, the committee that advises the CCG until that closed. But I had a spell in the hospital, but I've also worked on committees in the hospital, and the difficulty of getting the things to come together is really, really problematic.
Yeah.
So yes. So this session for me has been really valuable. I believe it will be in a much wider sense, but the public really do need to know that they're needed.
Yeah. Thank you. We keep trying to tell them, but them, inverted commas. Yeah. No, thank you. That's really helpful. Are there any other questions or comments?
I was just going to say, if Genevieve, if you want to, email me, or if Anna can help us link up, then that would be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I can't see any other questions. Anna, can you see anything that I can't?
No, I can't see any other hands up.
Oh. Yeah, it's weird when you can't see everybody on screen. So I don't think we need to scrabble around for questions or comments. I think we can I think draw the session to a close now, and I thank the contributors. Thank you very much, team. Thank you. I hope you feel it was a good use of your time, and I owe you. So there we are. I'm being recorded saying I owe my colleagues for so generously making their time available in what is a busy term, I think, for all of us. So thanks very much. Thank you for the audience for coming along, and our next session, and you're going to have to remind me because the chat's moving. We have a session with Justin Fisher on November the
16th. So I put the
16th.
link in the chat, but it's also on the events page, or just email me if you want the link again. Yeah. So that's a similar time. That'll be noon till 1:30ish.
And this is to do with policymakers and working around that in that arena. So thanks everybody. I hope you feel it was a good use of your lunchtime. Any feedback is very welcome, and we'll try and follow up with some other events, some of the points raised. Thanks everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.